Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Gay people and awakening in America.
I was very, very pleased to be asked to speak here. I have some connections with the gay Buddhist community that are very important to me. One of the friends of the meditation center was Isan Dorsey. I'm sure all of you have heard of him. I wanted to begin by asking some questions. My first question is, how many of you here believe in the genuine possibility of awakening? Okay. How many of you here believe in the genuine possibility of a gay person awakening? How many of you here believe that there are currently living awakened gay spiritual teachers in America? Okay. And how many of you here believe that you will awaken in this lifetime? Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about our approach at the Taiyu Meditation Center to the teaching of awakening. It is our feeling that in order for a culture of enlightenment or awakening to develop in this country, that is the understanding that this is a real possibility in a human lifetime, it is necessary for the teaching to become fully American. That is, as long as the teaching is foreign in any way, it will not take root. It's my understanding that as Buddhism went from country to country, it became native. It went native in each of those countries. It changed its forms, its language, its practices, and that in that way took root. And so it is my feeling that in order for the teaching to take root here in this country, that same process has to take place, and I believe it is taking place. Of course, it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so it is necessary to be able to extract that which is essential to the teaching from that which is simply traditional. I was told an interesting story of when Sun Sanim, who's a Korean Zen master, first started teaching in this country. He naturally asked that the men sit on one side and the women sit on the other side. And of course, the Americans all ignored him. They simply sat where they wanted to. It just didn't fit into their worldview at all. And I think that kind of thing has to go by the wayside if the teaching is going to take root here in this country. Similarly, cultural traditions dealing with sexuality that are not germane to the teaching have to fall by the wayside. And so I think it's very encouraging that there is a group such as this, which is reawakening what is my understanding was always a very important part of the Buddhist spiritual tradition. An article just appeared in the Harvard Lesbian and Gay Review about the history of gay people in Buddhism. And there has always been a very strong influence of gay people in Buddhist practice. I noticed when I asked about gay spiritual teachers, awakened gay spiritual teachers, there was some hesitation, and not that many hands went up. Certainly was not everyone. And I think that one of the issues that gay people in America have to deal with in this context is the idea that there might be some problems for gay people to awaken, or that gay people are less likely to awaken than a non-gay person. Certainly it's been my experience that gay people seem reluctant to recognize or accept even the existence of awakened gay teachers, and seem less likely to study under a gay teacher, and instead seem more drawn to non-gay teachers. And that might be understandable in the sense of wanting to get a different perspective on life. But it should not flow out of feeling like the teaching cannot reside in that fashion. I'd like to switch subjects now and talk a little bit about our approach to teaching and to teaching meditation. It has been our conclusion that Americans need to study differently than people in other cultures, that our approach to meditation has to have some modifications. Most of the Eastern meditation forms were based, for example, on the monastic model. That is, if you wanted to meditate, you would go and live in a monastery, or you would go and live in a cave, or you would go and live in the forest. We don't have too many caves, monasteries, or forests here in the United States. Similarly, one was expected to live by begging if one were undertaking spiritual sadhana. That's also difficult to do in the United States. So, from that standpoint, we need to develop a different model for practice in this country. And my guess is that the householder model will be the one that's going to work. That is, that one lives an ordinary life and still has one's practice. But that creates some problems. How does one engage in practice, the sufficient practice necessary to awaken, without devoting one's full life to it? That is, in a monastery or in a cave. Fortunately, there are other ways to meditate. And so one of the forms of meditation that we teach, we call self-observation. And we characterize this as active meditation, as opposed to solo sitting meditation, which can be considered to be passive meditation. And the distinction with self-observation is that it is meant to be engaged in the midst of one's daily activities. When one's driving one's car, having an argument, working, eating, it does not make a separation between meditation and the rest of one's life. And this has both advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that it's much more difficult to remember to engage in one's practice because there are all the demands of one's ordinary life going on. But if one can master the trick of doing one's practice in the midst of one's daily life, then one has unlimited time available for meditation. Furthermore, one is meditating in the midst of all of the challenges of life. So there is not the danger of becoming centered in a cave, but then as soon as you walk out of the cave, you lose it. You see? If you can make the start, then you have the possibility of having your entire life be meditation, your entire life be your practice, which of course is the aim anyway. So this is the model that we have adopted, is what we call, as I said, active meditation. A second modification or addition that we have made to the traditional meditation idea is that because of cultural differences, we need more or some different things out of meditation than was true in Eastern culture. You're probably mostly familiar with the fact that in Eastern culture, relationship and cooperation are considered to be the most important qualities. A typical saying might be, the nail that sticks out will get hammered. Okay? Whereas our paradigm here in the West is, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. See? We are taught to be pioneers and rugged individualists. So it's understandable then that in the Eastern model, when you meditate, you create a kind of internal cave with which to confront the self, cutting the rest of creation off, with which you are already very much involved. Your very identity is involved in your family, your town, your country, your culture. Whereas here in the West, our primary relationship is individual, as I said, as a pioneer, standing up on our own 2 feet. And so we have the problem of sometimes feeling cut off or isolated from the rest of the creation. So we have added a meditative form that is a 2-person meditation that we call co-meditation, as a way of confronting the self as reflected in others. We learn to use another as a mirror for ourselves. And in that way we can learn stuff about ourselves that would be very difficult to learn in solo sitting meditations, just like it's hard to see your own back. In this way, we use other people as teachers. And so I'd like to just do a very brief example of that for us so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'd like each of you to pick a partner, and you turn and face them, and you get as close as possible without actually touching. Okay, and when I say start, I would like you to establish eye contact with your partner. And the aim is to put the kind of attention on your partner that you would normally put on your own image in the mirror. Okay? You're putting your full attention on the other person. If you notice thoughts arising, simply redirect your attention on your partner. Okay, this is now the center of your world. Okay, any questions? Okay. Yeah.
Didn't you say it's important which eye you gaze at?
No. Usually it's simpler to gaze sort of in the center of the between the 2 eyes, and then you can see both eyes. But you can experiment with that. And you want to have a relaxed gaze, not a fixed stare. Okay. Start. Stop. And we would normally do that for 10 or 20 minutes. Is that about a half hour? Huh? Well, I don't know what to Our particular spiritual tradition, the Fourth Way, has sometimes been characterized as cowboy Zen. And the reason for that is that we take the position that awakening is not something that happens to you or that someone does to you, that is a guru assisting you, but that it's something that you have to go out and lasso. And so basically it's not going to happen unless you make it happen, unless you insist that it happen. On the other hand, if you insist that it happen, it has no choice but to happen. The universe is so set up that you cannot be denied awakening if you make it your aim in the proper way. A second or another difference in our approach or understanding of practice is that we feel that here in the West, awakening will take the form of gradual awakening. We believe that there are cultural reasons why sudden awakening has been more common in the East. And the reason is this. In Eastern cultures, the relationship to authority is very powerful. That is, someone who is older, someone who is wiser, someone who is more powerful receives tremendous respect, and there is a great distinction between levels. The relationship between the student and the Zen master, or the student and the guru, is very distinct and distant. And for the student to reach the level of the teacher requires the breaking or shattering of this very powerful cultural conditioning. And so basically what happens is the pressure builds up and the pressure builds up and the pressure builds up and finally it shatters and here we are together. Okay. But the reason that it takes that sudden form is because it has to shatter this very powerful barrier. Here in the West, if anything, we have the opposite problem. We have very little respect for authority, and we like to think of ourselves as being the equal of everyone. The problem with that is that we can be left with the lowest common denominator. No one's very good. And so there has been a lot of difficulty in understanding the nature of a spiritual teacher here in the West, particularly when it's taken the extreme form of the guru model or the yogic model. So it is our expectation and it has been our experience that awakening will take a more gradual form here in the West because there is not this powerful barrier to overcome. And that has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it doesn't have to be such a traumatic experience. One can solidify and develop in a more, in a less choppy way. One of the disadvantages is that one doesn't have this sharp demarcation. And so it is actually possible, we believe here in the West, for people to become awakened and not really characterize it as that. I mean, they'll know that something's different, but they don't have the lightning and the thunder phenomena to say, I'm awakened. And so we'll probably have to develop some models dealing with that and some different transmission procedures to deal with that. Let's see. There's some other stuff I want to talk about. And if there's questions along the way, I mean, feel free to bring them up. Yeah.
Maybe I'm anticipating your talk about what we'll get later on, but seems like you're talking in general terms, East culture versus West culture. I wonder if you can talk about gay Western culture and what the experiences, phenomena, and advantages and disadvantages that gay men and lesbians experience in this culture towards spiritual practice.
Well, that's a good question, and I was going to get to that, but I'm glad you said it because I might have forgotten. As in other things, gay people have certain advantages and disadvantages when approaching spiritual work. Up until recently, gay people had the advantage of, in order to survive successfully, they had to question the basic tenets of the culture, because it became very obvious quickly that the culture did not understand very many important things about the nature of sexuality, and many things attendant on that. And so a lot of gay people, I believe, up until recently, received an extra push in their lives to explore the nature of reality, and a lot have been drawn to spiritual practice. The disadvantage has been that, well, actually several disadvantages. One has been that a lot of gay people have been basically crushed by the overwhelming pressure of society, and so they have come to spiritual work damaged often. Secondly, if one has questioned the values of one's culture and gotten past them, it is very easy to think that one has attained all that is possible to attain. And so many gay people have found themselves sort of freed of the constraints of society, but not found anything real to be of service to. And so the result has been a lifetime of selfish freedom. And that's not very satisfying either. So now, of course, the culture is changing. One of the things that I do is I'm a mentor in a counseling program for gay youth. And when this program started, most of the people who were mentees, it's a mentor-mentee relationship, were in their early 20s. But now it's down to high school level. You're getting 17-year-old kids and 14-year-old kids. And that's wonderful and exciting. But on the other hand, it means that we're losing some of the advantages in terms of being pushed towards spiritual work that we once had. So gay people will be sort of in the same boat as everyone else.
Yeah. Following on, do you think there are any innate biological or, I'll just leave it at that, forces that distinguish a gay person and is there history as part of a tribal society, as a shaman or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that being a spiritual practitioner is one of the basic archetypes, if you will, for gay people to follow. I mean, in a sense, that's one of our purposes in being here, is to engage in spiritual practice. I mean, we have other archetypes also, creative archetypes, healing archetypes, counseling archetypes, and so on. But definitely, being a spiritual practitioner is one of our great archetypes, and so I think that a certain percentage of gay people will always be drawn towards spiritual practice, and that's very, very nice. That's one of the ways that we are of service to society, and one of the reasons why we exist. So that's nice. That's nice. And I think society is gradually beginning to recognize that. I mean, everyone has always known that a large percentage of our priesthoods have been gay, but we haven't talked about it. Now at least it's beginning to be talked about, and that's very nice.
I think what is
interesting about that is that when you mentioned the priesthoods and this coming out, and the way that it has come out, unfortunately, in my perception, but it has come out in the form of molestation in many ways. And this is so typical of at least Western society, because the inability not only for priests but for gay people in general to establish normal, typical relationships has been very difficult. I don't know how the Eastern culture sees that, how it would be different there, but I think it's kind of interesting.
Well, I think that it's my understanding that many Eastern cultures have had somewhat less problems in this area than we have had in the West, because they haven't had the puritanical drift to the culture. But they have their own problems in that area. One of the great issues or challenges of this particular time period, I think, is the understanding of the relationship between spirituality and sexuality. It's like the koan for this time period. And many of the Eastern teachers who have come over here have had to deal with this particular issue, because not faced with the cultural constraints that existed in the East, that is with the free availability of sexual activity here in the West, in fact, with students even throwing themselves at the teacher, they have had to deal with the relationship between sexuality and spirituality. In many of the Eastern traditions, the way it was dealt with was simply to not deal with it. No, there's no connection. A monk cannot look at a woman. You see. and that may have worked then, but that will not work now. And so all of the traditions are now confronting what is the relationship between sexuality and spirituality? How is a spiritual teacher supposed to deal with sexual invitations from students and so on? And I don't claim to have answers in those, but I do claim that this must be confronted. It is a very important issue. The sexual energy is one of the great driving forces that can be harnessed for the teaching, but only if it's not denied, only if it's not dammed up. So I think that celibacy, for example, is not going to be the answer here in the West, but we'll see. Yeah.
I feel left a little bit with my wonderful 2 minutes with this guy over here. Can you talk more about your practices and what this does, and that type of meditation, the co-meditation that we did. The only time I've ever done it before was when I did body electric. That's what I did.
Okay, well.
I'd like to know more about your practices.
Okay.
Because I understand the general frame of what you're talking about, but how you would do it is very, very curious.
Okay, thank you.
Also, may I add, could you, when you're talking about the practices, how does this flow out of the Fourth Way history, the tradition? When I first was involved in Fourth Way many years ago, I was disinvited because I was gay. So this is a whole, your work is done with gay men, which has been very enlivening. But I'm wondering how that change happened.
Okay, I'll give you a quickie Fourth Way background. The Fourth Way is a spiritual tradition that was brought to the West by a man named Gurdjieff. And basically he's one of the first teachers to present a teaching that is Western in flavor, that is understandable directly by Westerners. And it's true that some of the people who came after him somehow got the idea that there was some problem with gayness in Fourth Way spiritual practice. However, some of his most important students were lesbians. I mean, he had a whole group that was just lesbians called the Chain. And so I don't know where that tradition started, but it's clearly wrong. Gurdjieff himself had no problem with that. Some of his and some, some of his chief disciples were gay people. And the first practice that I talked about is self-observation, and that's the major Fourth Way practice. Co-meditation is something that we have added ourselves. And we feel that co-meditation is important in addition for the reasons I talked about earlier, because you've probably heard the expression, the eyes are the window of the soul. And one of the traditional methods of control in culture has been to control who you can look at. For example, in feudal societies, a serf was not allowed to look at a nobleman. That was punishable. Those of you who saw the series Shogun, there's one scene where the samurai chops the head off a peasant that dared to look at him in the eyes. Okay, so this one method of maintaining your superiority over others is to prevent them from looking at you. Similarly, women have not been allowed to look at men. If a woman looked directly at a man, then that was a sexual invitation, and she was a whore. So we know instinctively that who we look at and how we look at people is very important. One of the reasons why Zen masters were considered to be so special is that they would look anyone in the eye. They would look a king in the eye. And that was, who is this guy? He's willing to look at me, a king, in the eye. And so we can learn a lot about ourselves by who we are willing to look at and who we are willing to have look at us. And so one aspect of this meditation is, in the course of the day, is to observe who you look at and who you are willing to look at. Do you only look at people that you find attractive? Do you only establish eye contact with people who you find attractive? Are there people you will not look at? This tells you about the nature of your inner life. And so this is a very important aspect of our practice.
When you say look at, what do you mean? You mean glance at? Or?
I mean establish eye contact with. You see them, they see you. No hiding. Yeah.
Just talk a little bit about being awake. I presume that this practice, you've woken up a little bit with it. And can you talk about your experience of being awake as opposed to times in your life when you're not awake or were not awake?
Okay.
I don't know anything about being awake, so I'm...
Okay, well, that's a good question. In our particular tradition, we say that humanity is basically asleep. And what asleep means is that we are not in touch with our essential selves. The essential self is that which is born into the world. And the problem is that in human civilization, as a result of our conflict with our desires as an individual, our needs as an individual, and what everyone else wants us to do, we develop this buffer or protective device, which we call the android, other traditions call the ego. And basically the essence hides inside that and eventually goes to sleep inside that, so that one is then living a mechanical and artificial existence. And so the process of awakening is the process of first recognizing that that's the problem, that one has been asleep, that one has not really been living one's own life. And secondly, then the process of digesting this protective structure that we have created so that we become once again exposed to the world, open to the world, touched by the world, vulnerable to the world. But the difference is that although we are now vulnerable to the world, we are not in the same position as we were when we were children. That is, we can confront the world with our eyes open and experience and understand all of the suffering of the world, and yet find the existence of life, existence as a human being joyful. So what we're attempting to do is regain our innocence, except innocence with understanding of the world, so that we can experience everything that life has to offer and everything that life gets to throw at us without flinching, without hiding, basically joyfully, with our arms open. So it's learning how to embrace the world fully without defense, without flinching. And that's quite a challenging undertaking. But it is doable. As I said, if you insist that that's the only way you're willing to live, then you will learn how to live that way. And the function of a spiritual teacher is to demonstrate, first of all, that that's possible. To demonstrate that it is possible to live in the world in essence, not hiding behind the ego. And secondly, to teach someone how to do that, to give suggestions, to give guidance, to suggest experiments that one can conduct to test whether that's possible and to test if it's possible for you. I can give you a clue as to the distinction between the android and the essence. The android is that which talks to us in our heads. The essence is silent. So if you want to know how you really feel about something, or what you're really supposed to do about something, you cannot find the answer by thinking about it. If you are ever confronted with a problem, I suggest that you take stock of how you feel, and then you sit and think about the problem for 5 minutes, and then you take stock of how you feel. And I guarantee you'll feel much worse, and much more confused. Okay? Your essence already knows from moment to moment what you should do, if you are willing to listen. But because the essence is silent, and the android is very loud, that can be difficult. That's why we meditate, is to learn how to get in touch with the essence, to remove some of the energy from the dialogue machine, so that we have some peace and quiet in which we can learn to hear the essence. Okay, but the aim, eventually, of spiritual practice is to digest the android, to digest the thinking mechanism, so that basically we are living in silence. Okay? And the world presents itself to us with incredible vividness, because we're not drowning it out with static, internal static. Yeah.
If something we ought to do is to try to return to some fundamental honesty in our dealings with people and not to lie, many of us, who are my age, gay men of my age, have spent most of our lifetimes hiding. And so I find myself ambivalent between when I wish to say this and when I wish not to say this, and whether, I'm word act up or word act out, perhaps. So what should I do? If I'm going to look this cute guy in the eye, who may or may not be straight, or whatever, is it my obligation to be honest at all times?
Well, you are not required to awaken in this lifetime. However, if you feel the need to awaken, it is your right. Okay?
So good.
Okay? However, age is no excuse. Okay? They've done studies with yoga, for example, and it doesn't matter what age you start doing yoga, you get basically the same benefits. You become more flexible. Okay? The same is true of spiritual practice. It doesn't matter when you start, you get the same benefits. Okay? It's true there may or may not be enough time to do everything this lifetime, but it's certainly not going to get any better by waiting. And there are benefits all along the way, at least in our practice. In gradual awakening, there are benefits all along the way. So every moment of your life is better for your practice, even if you don't reach some theoretical goal. Okay, my feeling is you have nothing to lose. But it has to be something that you really want, because it isn't. It is work. Yeah.
I would like to ask about the difference between the ego and the silence, because you use the word hearing the silence. Now, that's a contradiction in my ears. And the ego is the chatterbox, which is not really me. There's something outside myself. And if I want to achieve silence, I can actually run my head into a wall, and then I'm silent. But that doesn't give me a nightmare. So would you explain that a little more?
Okay. There's about 3 or 4 things that you brought up in that question there. One of them is the difference between emptiness and nothingness. It's the big question. Most of us have the idea that silence means nothingness, and that's not true. At least that's not the silence that I'm talking about. The silence that I'm talking about is emptiness or voidness. What that means is the silence of potential, the silence in which you can hear a pin drop. It's a very pregnant pause. It's the moment before creation. And so that's a very powerful moment. It's a very exciting moment. It's not the silence of death. It's the silence of imminent life. It's the moment before the baby cries. Okay, and that's what we're looking for, is to live in that moment where the entire creation will take place in the next moment, and we have no idea what it will be like. And of course that's very exciting, and it's something to look forward to every moment. That's what we're aiming for. Okay. Is that okay? We could talk a lot about that. Yeah.
We just have a few more minutes. So
okay. All right. So 2 more questions.
Sure.
Okay.
As far as the, it's kind of nuts and bolts question. As far as the co-meditation goes, one advantage of meditation by yourself is that it's pretty flexible as far as your schedule goes. You can do it whenever you can. I guess it's a 2-part question. First of all, does co-meditation mean a commitment to meditate with one particular partner? And if so, how do you work that out? Or it just means you just meditate with someone who's available at the time?
Well, our approach is to try and co-meditate with as many different people as possible, as often as possible. So, I mean, we have, as part of our regular meditation meetings, we have a period of co-meditation, and then during the midst of your life, you can do flashes of co-meditation all the time. And so if you're in a relationship, of course, it's wonderful to do co-meditation with a partner. But then you don't have to make arrangements. You're living with the person. In our movies and stuff like that, the only people who ever look at each other in the eye are lovers, see, or people with babies, see,
or enemies.
Or enemies. That's right. And so we know that there's power there, but that is available to us in a lot more context than we've allowed. And one last question.
Yeah, the making of distinctions is always a problematic thing in Buddhism, and the 4th way versus what other 1, 2, 3 ways, etc. And what I hear you saying is really what I associate with basic Buddhist teaching. We call it self-awareness, or we call it mindfulness. And, so I'm just wondering of the value of saying it's the 4th way rather than this is getting back to core basic Buddhist teaching that has always been available to us, and it's been going through other traditions, and we're rediscovering that. And the reason I ask that is because we are criticized sometimes of what is this gay Buddhism, or what is this Western or this American Buddhism, and yet we do have Zen Buddhism and Tantric Buddhism or Shambhala or whatever. So is there a real value in saying now there's a 4th way rather than it's a sort of a rediscovery of basic Buddhist teaching?
Okay. In my opinion, there is only one teaching. However, like God, it has many names, many faces, and that's fine and appropriate, because sometimes you can hear from one person what you cannot hear from another person. And so it's fine for the teaching to have different clothes and different names and different forms. And so that's good. We live in the universe of 10,000 things, and so there can be 10,000 teachings, and that's fine. But it is important that each of those recognize that there is only one teaching. And so in your search or work with a teaching, you should make sure that teaching understands that there is only one teaching, and then there'll be no problem. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we brought some newsletters and a sign-up sheet from our organization if people are interested.
Where is it?
Stuart will sit here. I don't know what you. Is there time or a place where you can do that, or?
Right here is good.
Okay. So Stuart will be here.
Well, what we do at this point, we'll have a few announcements, and then people can go and get tea. And I think Clint brought something today.
Yeah, but it's like a delivery card.
Wear that. So we'll do a few announcements and then a break, and then some people from GBF who would like to also, if anyone who is new and would like to kind of get some information on that end of it, we'll have a few people here. Maybe you could identify yourself so you'll stay after and talk to people. Oh, I mean the people who will talk to people about GBF. Okay, and then of course you guys will stay here.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.